we now have Naya's skull, and Naya has a complete skull. And from that complete skull, we are going to reconstruct her face.
We now possess Nia's skull. An intact skull, whole and preserved over time. From this delicate but resilient relic, we can map her face, restoring the past to living color. But her bones tell only one tale. Ancient DNA found deep within a Mexican cave is rocking history at its foundations. Buckle up, because what was revealed has left researchers amazed, skeptics searching for answers, and long-held beliefs regarding human migration suddenly fragile and questionable. How is it possible that one finding had the potential to rewrite all we believed regarding the first to set foot in the Americas? Was their story of arrival completely different from what textbooks have so assuredly taught for centuries? Or is there yet another secret chapter, one deeply buried in the past? The truth contained in those ancient remains has fueled intense controversy, causing scientists and historians to reassess, and even challenge, everything they had known regarding the origins of the earliest Americans. This discovery may forever change how humanity understands its own history. Hidden beneath Tulum is a world most will never experience. If you could strip back the blue waters of the Caribbean and tread beneath the thick jungle cover, you would enter a maze of limestone tubes filled with calm, dark water. Divers refer to them as cenotes and cave lines, but in reality, they are nature's time capsules. The sea level was over 100 meters lower during the last ice age, and these caves were not underwater but large, hollow dry chambers. They were walked through by people and animals. Then, over thousands of years, the water level crept up and flooded out the caverns, burying everything inside. The expanding seas closed the chambers, protecting skeletons, charcoal, even fragile handprints from scavengers, wind, and the sun. This is why the caves of Mexico's Yucatan have been mute witnesses to the high-level debate about who the first Americans were and how they really got there. But nature is not always a benevolent record-keeper. Heat, salt, and moisture creep into bone, nibbling at its molecules and destroying its secrets. Most of the skeletons in these caves are still immaculate in appearance, their forms elegantly preserved, but genetically they have nothing to say. Envision it. Hundreds of kilometers of underwater tunnels sweeping along the coast, areas explorers have charted meter by meter. These explorers set down slender lines like breadcrumbs in the dark, and bring cameras into giant rooms where no light has entered for thousands of years. In these speechless cathedrals, scuba divers have unearthed more than a dozen ancient human beings that are scattered throughout the larger Tulum cave systems, their bones resting in addition to giant Ice Age beasts. The caves were an archive much richer than anyone could have conceived, bones wedged behind rock curtains, covered with dustings of stalactite dripstone that ironically assist archaeologists in aging them. Dating is everything. You cannot talk about the first Americans without setting a date for when they lived. Radiocarbon dating of bone collagen is the reliable technique in most archaeological sites. But here, in the salty underwater caves, time has dissolved away the collagen. So scientists resorted to uranium-thorium dating, tracking the calcite crust that gradually formed over the bones after they sank into the dark waters. That mineral crust turns into a natural clock. When a finger bone is encased in a thin veneer of calcite, researchers are able to date the veneer and give a minimum age to the bone under it. It was by this means that one woman from the Chonhol system was found to be at least 9,900 years old, no collagen needed. But the caves contain more than dates, they save faces. The skulls also reveal a second type of story, that of appearance. Early skulls of Yucatan tend to have rounded foreheads with low vaults. Other skulls from around the same time in central Mexico are longer and thinner, with higher vaults. To the casual observer, this contrast appeared too striking to be dismissed. Did it indicate that two completely different groups had settled in Mexico? For decades, that became the idea that polarized the scientific community. Some held that the first Americans were a people who were later displaced. Others thought the disparity indicated regional variation within one large population. The bones themselves were no help. Only DNA could tell. And indeed, the Mexican caves did contain DNA, at least in one remarkable instance. Deep in a chamber named Hoyo Negro, divers found almost intact skeleton of a teenager. The villagers called her Nia. At about 12 to 13,000 years ago, she dropped into a concealed pit and never resurfaced. Despite all odds, one of her teeth still had bits of mitochondrial DNA, the kind inherited from mother to daughter. That tenuous whisper took her maternal heritage through the ages. Her ancestry went back to Ice Age ancestors from Beringia, the Ice Age land bridge that originally connected Siberia to Alaska. To put it another way, a girl who passed away in a Mexican cave had the same profound maternal heritage as present-day Native Americans. One genetic thread changed the argument in its entirety. Suddenly, the cave mystery girl wasn't an exception but a part of the great ancestral tale in its own right. Nia was not the sole find. In 2016, divers exploring another cave system at Tulum encountered a surreal scene. In a chamber called Chonhole, Little Hole, they discovered a second skeleton, who would come to be named Chonhole 3. She was fragmentary, but what remained was remarkable: a skull, teeth, hand and leg fragments, all covered in crystalline crust of mineral. Her bones held no DNA, unlike Nia. But her skeleton had much to say nonetheless. She had cavities plaguing her teeth, proof of a diet rich in sugar, perhaps natural fruits and starches. She wore scars of chronic head trauma, blows endured but never accounted for. She harbored a bacterial infection. She made it to her early 30s despite these tribulations, a decent age in her era. She became less of an artifact and more of an individual, a life characterized by hardship and survival. But her skull sparked the same uncertainty. Round-headed Yucatan skulls contrasted with the long, thin skulls of central Mexico. Was this proof of two independent migrations into the Americas, or of a single founding population whose descendants settled quickly into their new homelands? Without DNA, Chonhole 3 had no answer. But her silence cut more acutely to the questions, forcing archaeologists to grapple with conflicting possibilities. And Nia returned again, the gap bridged by her DNA. Though her skull had Paleo-American characteristics, her maternal line bound her definitively to the Beringian forebears of contemporary Native Americans. Her remains, with one stroke, testified that skull shape by itself was not evidence of distinct migrations. Variation might be present within a single, undivided population. The findings echoed outside of science. For indigenous people, Nia's DNA proved what oral histories had always kept alive, a continuous link between the earliest ancestors and living relatives. She was not merely an archaeological find, she was family, her history woven among theirs. But all caves did not speak the same tale so nicely. In northern Mexico, deep in the mountains, excavations at Chiquihuite Cave hinted at a much older presence, 26,000 to 30,000 years ago. Archaeologists discovered thousands of pointed stone shards they thought were tools, along with radiocarbon dates much earlier than the Beringian migration timeline. If it's true, this would change everything. But skeptics countered that the stones might be natural breaks. No human remains, no DNA, were discovered. The controversy continues: was it evidence of a prior migration, or a delusion etched by nature? Next, the most astonishing DNA findings to date. From a single Mexican cave, geneticists pulled out sequences never before witnessed. These did not merely match Siberia. They suggested Southeast Asia, even Oceania. Some samples were over 30,000 years old, predating the established timeline for human arrival in the Americas. And if accurate, this implied that the first Americans were not one monolithic group but a composite of various peoples coming in waves, well before history ever so much as noted their existence. This potential amazed archaeologists and geneticists. If the Americas were colonized by several migrations, the human arrival story is much older, much richer, and much more enigmatic than we could have dreamed. But it did leave one haunting question: what happened to these first people? Their DNA reveals that they lived, flourished, and made their presence known. But now, today, their genetic imprints have disappeared, taken in or erased by subsequent populations. The discoveries in these caves have rocked the foundations of history. For scientists, they require migration theories to be rewritten. For indigenous peoples, they confirm the extent of ancestral connections. And for humankind as a whole, they serve as a reminder that our narrative is not as straightforward. Mexico's caves whisper of lost pages, of ancient migrations wiped out, and of individuals who trod in the dark, leaving behind remnants that patiently waited for us to discover them after thousands of years. The Chiqui controversy is significant because it forms the context for how we understand sites such as Hoyo Negro and Chanjol. In the Yucatan, we have skeletons whose ages comfortably find a place in the accepted 12,000 years ago. In the case of Nia, we even have DNA that connects her to Binjia and to existing indigenous populations. That's rock solid. With Chiqui Hewitt, we have only a whisper, an argument made on shaky stones. It invites us with an older tale, but does not yet bear the weight to overrule the one we already have. Yet, the potential keeps the mystery alive. Might there have been precedent, now lost, migrations into the Americas? Might small groups have reached Mexico and left behind only the faintest hint lost to time and climate? Cave DNA from Mexico. When the results finally returned, the scientists were amazed to discover that the ancient DNA recovered in a Mexican cave yielded the true origins of the first Americans. Markers that were consistent with the Siberian ancestors once thought to have traversed the Bering Land Bridge into North America. But the evidence was much different. The genetic sequences found in the cave did not conveniently fit within the established migration routes. Rather, they indicated a blend of lineages, some of which had never before been encountered in modern native populations. Among them was a genetic mark that led not just to Siberia, but to unanticipated parts of Southeast Asia and even Oceania. This indicated that the Americas could have been reached by various migrations by groups coming from various directions much prior to textbooks stating. As per one scientist, this is insane. These people have been here 40 times longer than the USA has existed. The most disquieting fact was how old the samples were. Some of them were over 30,000 years old, thousands of years before the conventional timeline of the first Americans. If the findings were true, then the caves in central Mexico had at one time housed some of the earliest human beings ever to tread the continent. Individuals who possessed genetic tails that had since disappeared from the present world. It was revolutionary for archaeologists, virtually unthinkable for geneticists. The notion that the initial Americans were not a monolithic homogeneous people, but rather a mosaic of various peoples who came in waves destroyed the venerable myth. It meant history was much more complicated, much more enigmatic, and much older than anyone had ever dreamed of. The finding generated a hot controversy. Some scientists accused the team of contamination or contamination methods. Others claimed that the DNA was degraded to the point of not being reliable. But with repeated tests, the evidence just intensified. Bit by bit, the tale was irrefutable. The cave contained secrets that could rewrite the history of a whole hemisphere. And yet, there was one question left. What became of these earliest humans? Their DNA indicated that they had been here once, breathing, living, prospering in Mexico's caves. Yet today, their genetic imprint was erased, removed from the subsequent populations. Had they been displaced, absorbed, or simply lost to history? Next steps. The day the DNA results were made widely known, the world of archaeology changed. The notion that the initial Americans did not necessarily arrive from a solitary migration, but that several groups